Well, everybody, it's a crisp 32-degree day here on December 30th, 2018. It's been a couple of days since I made that run down into Connecticut and then to Palmer, Mass to pick up these new acquisitions, and we had a lot of pouring rain. The weather here has just been crazy. We had 50-degree weather on Thursday, but it poured rain. Yesterday it was in the 40s and pretty windy, but I had other work I had to do, so I wasn't able to do anything yesterday. So today, Sunday, is the first day I've got to do anything as far as even look at these things, and it's of course freezing cold again. And then tomorrow, for New Year's Eve, it's supposed to warm up again. So it's just crazy weather we're dealing with. Anywho, so up until now, I haven't told anybody what the heck these things were. So I'm curious how many guys guessed before I show these things what they are. So 3, 2, 1. And what you guys are looking at is not one, but 2 surface grinders. And I did not intend to get 2 surface grinders, but I went down, made a low offer on that one, which is a Rockwell, because of what it needs to have done to it. And in the meantime, got contacted by the owner of this one, who said, if you're still interested, you can have it. Just come and get it out of my shop. So that one's a freebie. So let's take a look at these things. So let's take a look at the Rockwell first, which is the less stout of the 2, less versatile, and has more issues. It's clearly not been running for quite a while. This was in a moving and storage warehouse in a dark, deep, damp area of the warehouse. It looks like it was probably sitting there for quite some time. And then they finally decided to get around to selling it. The gentleman I dealt with was a young man who works for the owner, and I guess he was tasked with trying to move some of this stuff by putting it online. So anyways, he advertised this on Facebook Marketplace weeks ago for $250. And then I don't know whether or not anybody even came and looked at it during that time. And then they reposted it on Facebook Marketplace without taking down the original post about a week ago for $200. And initially, I didn't even see the first post. But then in a discussion with the gentleman, he explained to me that his boss doesn't like to get rid of anything. He's the kind of guy that if he doesn't get his price, he'll just let it sit there. So, I didn't want to drive an hour down to Manchester just to find out that the price was $200 firm, and that there may be issues with it. They couldn't tell me much about it. So I basically said, I'll give you scrap for it, scrap value for it. And actually, I'm not even sure what the scrap value was, but I shot him an offer. I explained to him what I found, which I'll show you in a moment. And I said, it's a project. It's worth $100 to me. And he said, no. He said, I know I can fix it up, and which I doubt he would ever get around to fixing it up. But I knew that it was for $100, it was gonna basically stay there. He wanted me to come up with my offer. So as he was walking away, I said, work with me here. I said, tell me what you're thinking, because if you're thinking 200 is the firm number on this, I'm walking. And he said, I'd go 150. And then I counted and I said, tell you what, I'll come up to 130. And he said, all right, get it out of here. And then there was a long ordeal. They had to move quite a bit of stuff to get this thing out, finally get this thing out, and we got it loaded. So I am now the owner of this thing for $130. So this is a Rockwell Manufacturing Company of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, model 24-150. So here's how she looks from this side. So I was able to do a little bit of research on this thing, and I found out this one is in particular pretty early grinder. two of the issues that you need to be aware of if you're considering purchase of one of these grinders. Issue number one. Apparently there were two different styles of bearings that were used in these grinders over the years. The earliest models had some sort of like a bronze or a phosphorus bronze bushing type of bearing system in there. And if that ends up being something that needs to be taken care of, you're gonna have a very expensive and difficult ordeal, from my understanding, as opposed to later models that went to a ball bearing spindle, so that you've got more conventional ball bearings inside that spindle. So what you got is you get the spindles over there, and you've got a belt drive going over to a motor. Okay, so when I went online and I was reading about this, the question was, how do you figure out whether or not you've got the ball bearing model or not, especially from when you're looking at just photographs on Marketplace? Well, the good news was that I noticed that somebody had said that the models that have this shroud the way it is, with that almost like a tool tray up on the top of the motor bracket, that those are the models that would have the ball bearings in them. Also, when I got there, well, I can't open the door now because the strap is on here, but when I got there, there was some stuff laying on top of the machine. One of the things that was laying on top of the machine, which I was really glad to see, was the guard. Because the guard, I knew the guard was missing. I was like, oh, that's going to be something you don't want to run it with the guard off. And not only that, but how hard is it going to be to get a guard? So my thought was I would end up having a fabricated guard. Now, the original guard was on the machine, and also there was a plastic bag with some bearings in it. And it occurred to me that somebody probably changed the bearings in that thing at some point, or was going to change the bearings. But that was a good strong indicator to me that that is a ball bearing spindle, in addition to what I had read online. I just want to take a moment to point out one of the coolest logos I've seen on a machine. That logo right there. Okay, so this machine, I think I found somewhere on this machine. Oh, you know what it is? The original owner's manual is with this machine. And on the original owner's manual, on the back, there's a date of 1965. So that firmly puts this machine in the 1960s, which means this machine was probably right in the middle of, or it was right around the time when the space race was going on between us and the Russians. So I think that was the driving force behind this interesting logo. So I told you guys that there's a second issue you need to know about with these Rockwell Delta and Rockwell grinders of this style. And the second issue is the motor. From what I read online, these motors that were installed on these machines were balanced to the machine. So the problem is, if you do not have the original motor on there, or the motor's bad and you need to put another motor on, you're going to have a problem with balancing, which is going to add additional vibration, which is obviously going to create an issue with surface finish. So the bit of good news so far is that is the original motor. It's a Rockwell motor. I believe it's the original. It's wired for 120 currently, but I was unable to run it. Again, thus my lowball offer on the thing, because my concern was if that motor is bad, then I'm going to have to change the motor out, and then we're going to run into that whole, oh, well, it's not balanced issue. And secondly, if it did run, I would be able to hear the noise the spindle bearings make, and that might give me an indication of the condition of them. It's not frozen. The spindle does rotate. However, even though it's wired for 120, I plugged it in, pressed the start button on the other side, and nothing happened. But then I noticed this wiring. The ground wire is bare, and the insulation on the other wires might be just as bad. So I'm surprised that it didn't just short out and trip a breaker. And actually the cord the guy brought me, we couldn't even tell if what he plugged into was live or not. So this is going to be kind of a mystery here as to what's going on there. You know what, just for the heck of it, I think I got a cord right here. I've got a GFI plug, so there's no danger in trying this. And when I say no danger, what I mean is that if the insulation is frayed and that there's a short between a either one of the lines to the cabinet or ground, the GFI will immediately trip. So there's a switch on the side here, start-stop switch. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what it did. Nothing. So I'm curious if it tripped the breaker. Well, it didn't trip the breaker, so we've got a wiring issue, hopefully, or a bad switch, hopefully, and not a completely cooked motor. Who knows? We will find out. So that down there is the actual table. Okay, and that was easy to take off. So I took that off before we even tried loading it or even moving it, because I didn't want that to fall down and for the casting on the end there to break. So that's basically, it's got one slot in it, and then you would have to put on a let's see, you could put on a magnetic chuck or some manner of vise. There were all kinds of accessories and attachments you could get for this thing, but apparently, according to the manual, it looks like it didn't come with anything other than just a table like that, and then you had to buy the other stuff. And none of that, unfortunately, was in the cabinet. So issue number one, which is kind of small potatoes really, is this obviously got biffed, and this shaft is bent. But oddly enough, the well, that's interesting. Well, that just fell out. I was going to say the traverse was working on this, not the traverse. The elevation was working on this, and that just fell out. All right, well, that's going to make that easy to take that out, straighten or replace that shaft, and Bob's your uncle. There's a plate right here. For those of you who are curious about how many ripums this thing makes, the RPMs, there are, it's a stepped pulley situation, so you open this up and remove the belt, change it to a different position on the pulley, and you can get 3,300 RPM, 3,900 RPM, and 5,700 RPMs. So this is the hand wheel to manually traverse. This is a completely manual machine. To manually traverse the bed back and forth underneath the wheel. And when I would rotate this, the bed was hopping up and like dropping down, hopping up, dropping down. And then there would be a skip where it seemed like it wasn't engaging any teeth. So I had no idea what the heck was going on with that, but I pointed out, well, there's something really wrong there. That's going to have to be resolved. And then when we took the bed off, or I took the bed off, looked at the pinion gear and rotated this, and look at that. There are no broken teeth, but the shaft is badly bent. So what happens is, when it's in this position, it doesn't engage the rack on the bottom of the table. And when you go in this position, it actually pushes the whole table up off of the ways. So that's going to need to be obviously resolved. Furthermore, this hand wheel here is actually supposed to be the hand wheel that traverses the table in and out. And when I try and rotate this, it's very difficult to rotate this, and the table, instead of moving in smoothly and staying parallel or parallel to the face of the wheel, it wants to cock. So there's something wrong with this whole mechanism here. So that's got an issue too. So why do I like this machine? Well, I like this machine for a couple of reasons. It's got a very small footprint. I think that I could do the repairs that are necessary on this machine to get it running again. And according to what I was able to find online, apparently it weighs in at 850 pounds. So at 850 pounds, this is manageable. It's actually doable or foreseeable that I could actually get this down into my basement shop. I mean, I got the Wells Index mill down there, and even though I took it apart to do it, the main body of the mill probably weighs in at least the same amount as this whole grinder does. Not only that, but it's completely foreseeable to me that it may be a matter of being able to actually remove that whole casting on the top there off of the cabinet. In other words, I might be able to do kind of like a modular move on this, the same way I did the Wells Index mill, where I can actually take it apart into sub-assemblies, same way I get the Vernon lathe down there. And the Hendy. Take it apart in sub-assemblies, although the Hendy, I initially tried moving too much of it, so that's another story. Anywho, might be able to get this whole thing down there and actually be able to use it down in my basement shop which brings us to surface grinder number 2. This is a Dual, I think it's a VR 612 or VS 612. I forgot exactly. 612 means that this is a 6-inch by 12-inch grinder. Okay, so this surface grinder here is a little more versatile, and it's definitely a stouter machine. I don't know what the base cabinet is made out of, but there is a lot of weight sitting right there. It does not look physically that much larger than this Delta Rockwell, but this is a completely different animal. This grinder, weight estimates I've found online are somewhere between 25 and 2,800 pounds. So this is a horse of a different color. I fear that I am not going to be able to use this grinder because I do not foresee being able to safely get it down my basement bulkhead stairs to use it in my shop, if it even works. So the story on this is, the gentleman who gave this grinder to me, he had this grinder sitting in his workshop for years because he had purchased this at a, it was on auction from a Votech school, but it was bundled with a Clausing Colchester lathe that he wanted. So the way he described it was one of these deals where if he was going to take the lathe, he had to take the grinder, and maybe he thought that at some point they were going to fix the grinder up. So the grinder, he said he knows nothing about it. He doesn't know if it even runs. It's missing, you know, some little components, the little sub handles there on the Traverse, and the see, I don't know what it's like, an X and a Y, right? But it's not a mill, it's a surface grinder. See, I know nothing about surface grinders, so it's nice that it's got the original guard on it. It's got the original light on it. I thought, you know, I didn't know, but it turns out I looked at photographs. That's the original light assembly, believe it or not. There is no cabinet door that opens, so there's no goodies inside that went with it. It's 3-phase. It was not under power. That's why he doesn't know. He said it was damaged when they moved it. So I would have to take all of that sheet metal off to see if there's any damage to the spindle or any of that. There's no visible damage on the outside there other than right here, the auto oiler. Actually, that's not an auto oiler, is it? Is that an auto? It must be. That's an auto oiling system. So it's a combination. It looks like you've got a manual right there, but then you get a motor on the top by the looks of it. So that is pretty badly biffed. I might actually be able to save that. These are still available because it's not uncommon for these to get busted. So I wonder whether or not that could be disassembled, the bracket straightened out, and just have a new reservoir installed on it. I even have a used reservoir, manual one, off of my my parts donor Wells Index mill. See, there's everything on here to scream that there's a coolant pump located in this somewhere. The hand wheel, the elevation hand wheel, is missing. And what's this here? Huh. It's interesting. Auxiliary outlet. That's a big switch there, I'll tell you. So this motor, it says, is a 1 horsepower, 230/460 volt 3-phase. Well, if we wire it for 230, 3-phase, 1 horsepower, I believe my larger VFD would run this. So I could probably wire this up and test it. But again, the scary thing about this machine to me is just the weight. I mean, this is not sheet metal. This is, it feels like it's been filled with concrete, for crying out loud. But it does traverse freely. That seems to be, you know, not frozen. I think I had rotated the spindle and that felt okay, as far as just like it's not seized up completely. Doesn't mean anything. So my thinking was, my rationale for still taking this was, it was for free. It was just a matter of me being willing to reroute my drive home from Manchester to Palmer, Massachusetts, and you know, I got the thing for free. And I figure worst case scenario, I mean absolute worst case scenario, is I could scrap this thing and get some money for the scrap value of it. And before I scrap it, I could pull off a few items that may very well be, you know, in demand by somebody. If somebody wants an original light for their Dual 612, I've got one. Somebody missing the guard for their Dual 612, I've got one. Somebody missing a hand wheel or two, I've got them. Is the spindle motor good? Don't know. Bench test that with my VFD, and I could sell that whole spindle assembly if somebody needs one, if it's good. Don't know, you know. What else? I think that about covers it. And then I still get all of this weight here for scrap value. Yeah, this is definitely got a coolant pump somewhere. Look at this. This is the return line as the stuff comes down into the tray there. It must go back through this line here into the reservoir somewhere in there and then get pumped back through. There's a couple of nipples right there, pipe nipples, so you can hook hoses up that aren't present.